Be'ezras Hashem, with Hashem's help, we begin today a new set of laws. Hilchos Parah Adumah, the laws of the red cow. And why is this here? It goes in order. The Parah Adumah, which we're going to see, the whole process of how you make the ash and you make the water that goes along with it, it's all there to purify people from Tum'at Met, from corpse impurity. So once you have the corpse impurity, now you have to know how to become pure from corpse impurity. In fact, the Midrash says that when Moshe Rabbeinu heard about the concept of corpse impurity, he said, wow, if a person comes into contact with a dead body, how's he going to become pure? Nitkarkemu panav shel Moshe, it says. His face became dark. He couldn't imagine how you could rise up after coming into contact with the dead, basically with death. And Hashem said, Parah Adumah is the answer, the red cow. We're going to use a method of purity that's higher than logic to purify this impurity which also defies logic. And the Rabbi actually once said, many times at the end of a set of laws, the Rambam will give some kind of ethical reflection on the meaning of those laws. The Rambam didn't do that yesterday at the end of the 25th chapter. He doesn't do any of that. Why? Because he doesn't want to make any interruption. He wants to go straight from the impurity right to the purity. I've told you so much about becoming impure from death. Let me tell you right away how to fix it. Not even going to stop to give you a lecture. No lectures. We're going straight from the purity to the impurity. So, as the Rambam always does, he gives us the list of mitzvahs that we're going to discuss in this set of laws. Yesh bichlolon shtei mitzvahs aseh. In this set of laws, we have a discussion of two positive mitzvahs, v'zehu pratan. These are the details. Aleph, din parah adumah. The laws related to preparing the red cow. And we're going to see there's a whole bunch of laws. First of all, the qualifications of the cow itself. Second of all, the burning of it, how to create the ashes of it. And then we have what's called beis, din tumas mei nida v'ta'arasam. The impurity and the purity around the mei nida. Mei nida literally means the waters of sprinkling. Because the way it used to work was after you burnt the parah adumah and you had the ash, you had to go fill up water in a very, very special, specific method. Then you had to mix the ashes with the water, also in a very specific way. And then you would sprinkle them on the person that became impure or the utensils that became impure, also in a very specific way. The people and the utensils themselves have to be prepared. And at the end of these laws, we're also going to see there's also a tumah. There's an impurity associated with these waters, which is also why it's in this book. Not only because it's a way to fix the corpse impurity, also because it has its own level of impurity. There's some part of tumah that gets imparted by these waters. That's the two mitzvahs we're going to discuss. Ubir mitzvahs elo beprakim elo. And the explanation of these mitzvahs are coming in the following 15 chapters, God willing. So for the next 2 weeks, this is going to be our topic. Perek Rishon, chapter 1, says that Rambam, we're going to talk today about the cow itself. What are the qualifications for the cow itself? Halacha Aleph, mitzvahs parah adumah. The mitzvah of the red cow is shetiyeh bas shalosh shanim or bas arba. First of all, she has to be a minimum of 3 years old or 4. So before 3 years old, the common consensus among the commentaries is that it's not kosher. Even a 2-year-old. There's a big discussion about a 2-year-old, but the Rambam says 3 or 4. If it was elderly meaning not like weak elderly meaning past the age of 4 years, past the proper age, ksheira, it's still kosher. Ela she'ein mamtinin la, but we're not going to wait. You have a chance to buy it in the 3 or 4-year-old range. Buy it, sacrifice it. Shema tashchir v'tipasel, because it might get some black hairs, and it become disqualified. Black hairs is a disqualifying sign, as we'll see in a moment. So therefore, we don't wait for it to get too old. Now, based on that logic, somebody might ask, okay, so if I see somebody with a red cow in their flock, let me buy it as early as I can. Why should I wait till it's 3 years old? Says the Rambam, no. We don't buy a calf and raise it. Before a cow is 3 years old, it's called an egla, which means a young calf. So you can't buy it in that stage and then raise it. Shenemar, because the Torah says, when it describes it, it says, V'yikchu elecha farah. They should buy for you a cow. That means when it's bought, it should already be a halachic cow, which is 3 years old. V'loy egla. And not a calf. Now, by the way, the commentaries point out that any sacrifice cannot be bought when it's mechusar zman, before the proper time of offering. So I don't need a verse to teach me that you can't buy a cow before it's fit to be offered. If the red cow can only be offered at 3 years old, so any time before that it's mechusar zman. Obviously I can't buy it. The novelty here is that you can't even buy it without consecrating it. You want to just buy it, keep it in your storage. You're not going to be makdish, you won't consecrate it. It's going to sit in your backyard, you're going to let it graze, you're going to take care of it, still not. This is the special verse. V'yikchu elecha farah. When they buy it, it should already be a cow. Lo matzu ela egla. What if all you find is a calf? You're searching in Israel, you need a red cow. All you can find is a red calf under the age of 3. So the Rambam says the maximum you can do is paiskin aleha damim. You can decide, like you can pre-decide the contract, fix the price.
Buy a future.
A future, there it is, exactly, yes. V'tiya eitzel be'aleha ad shetagdil v'te'asa parah. But it must stay by its owners. It should never enter hektish property. Stay by the owners till it grows up and it becomes a cow. This is one of those communal expenses that were bought from the half-shekel coins. Every year, we saw in the Rambam's 3rd book, every Jew used to give half-shekel coins. What was it for? For communal sacrifices. This is included. One of the things they would buy is the Parah Adumah, if ever was needed to have a new red cow. As we'll see in chapter 3, there was only 9 in history. But when it was needed, if the need arose, you would use the money in this half-shekel fund to buy it. Halacha Beis, after the qualifications of the age, there's qualifications of the animal itself. Zeh shenemar b'Torah tmima. You look in the verse, it says you have to buy a Parah Adumah, a red cow, tmima. It should be complete. And when we say complete, usually we mean complete with no blemish, which is also going to be true, but that's the next words. Asher ein bamum. There's no blemish. So what does tmima mean? It says the Rambam, tmimas admimus. It's completion of redness. Lei tmimas koima. Doesn't mean completion of height. Elohim hoisan anasa kshera, kishara kachim. If it was midget, it's kosher like any other sacrifice, but it has to be fully red. Hayu bashtei saides levanis. Oy shcheirais. If there were just 2 white or black hairs, b'soich guma achas, even if they're in one follicle, right? Look at your body, every hair is coming out of one pore. What if there's 2 white hairs or 2 black hairs, but they're both coming out of the same follicle? Oy b'soich shnei kaisais, or they're in 2 follicles. That's how most mefarshim understand. Guma and kais is the same thing. They're both follicles, just different names. Even if it's in 2 follicles, vehein, my Rambam has munachos, zu al zu, but the common text is ve'in moichichos, zu al zu. They're so close together that they prove about each other that they're really considered one entity. So one would think that since they're one entity, there's less reason to be stringent. No, says the Rambam, psula. It's already enough. As long as I have 2 hairs that are not the color red, disqualified. Halacha gimel, hayu bashtei saidas. Ikran maidim v'reishan mashchir. What if there was 2 hairs that at the bottom were red, but at the top they're black? They change colors. Ikran mashchir v'reishan maidim, or if the bottom they're black and the top they're red. Says the Rambam, hakoil hoilich achar ha'ikar. Everything goes after the bottom of the hair. If the bottom of the hair is black, it's bad news. The bottom of the hair is red, it's good news. However, even if the bottom of the hair is red, v'goizes b'misparayim es reishan hamashchir. First of all, you have to cut off with scissors the black part. Why? Commentaries give 2 reasons. Number 1, maris ayin. Many times in the halacha, we're worried about what people will see. If you don't cut the black part off the hair, people might look at it and say, oh, there's black hairs. Number 2, Tosfos says this, very interesting concept. He says, one of the things of Parah Adumah is that it should be beautiful and red. If you have a top of the hair that's black, it weakens the general reddish beauty. So cut it off. It's not a halachic thing, more of a beauty thing. No need to worry about shearing sacrificial animals. One of the things that you're not allowed to do with an animal that's consecrated for a sacrifice is you can't cut its hair. So why is this not cutting its hair? Because your intent is not to get the shearing. You're just trying to create the animal to be red. On the other hand, halacha daled says that Rambam when you cut off the black hair, you have to leave enough of the red hair. It has to be big enough that it could be cut with a scissor. In general, in halacha, we recognize hair size if it's big enough to be cut with a scissor. So here also, you have to leave from the red part enough to be cut with a scissor. Shekol saira she'ena niteles bezug harehi ki'ilu ena. Because any hair which cannot be cut with a scissor is as if it doesn't exist. And we need this red hair to be here. Some commentaries point to the fact that the Mishnah says that if you have a number of individual black hairs, not 2 together, you're allowed to pull them out completely, and it's fine. So why do we care over here that the hair should be missing? It'll be like just the black hair plucked out. But the commentaries say that clearly when you cut a hair, it's different than when you pluck a hair. When you pluck a hair, you can get rid of it. When you cut a hair, you have to at least leave some of the red, some of the redness. Lefichach, therefore, im hayu ba shtei seides levanes shcheides she'enan nilkatin bezug. This law of leaving a scissor length becomes also a leniency. If you have two white hairs or two black hairs that are not big enough, she'enan nilkatin bezug, they're not big enough to be cut with a scissor, hadezuk sheda, it's kosher because it doesn't have two qualifying black hairs. The hairs aren't big enough. Halacha hey hayu karneha oitlafeha shcheidim. Very interesting. If the horns of the cow or the hooves of the cow are black, yagoit, you should cut them. You should cut off the horns, cut off the hooves before you offer it. In other words, the horns and the hooves are considered to be somewhat of an essential part of the animal. They have to be reddish. If they're not reddish, you got to cut them off. On the other hand, galgal ha'ayin, the hashinayim, the halashain, the eyeball, and the teeth, and the tongue, ein mar'ein paislim b'parah. The appearance of that is fine. That doesn't disqualify a cow. It can be left in its natural color. It doesn't have to be reddish. Halacha vav, hoisa bayabeles v'chatcha. If there was a wart or a growth, and you cut it off, afal pisha tzamach b'mkayma seyar adam, even if red hair grows in its place, psula, it's disqualified. Why? Two opinions in the commentaries. Either because when you cut off a wart, naturally the hair that grows back won't be fully red, or because of a mum, you're making it blemished. It's not tmima, it's not complete anymore. Halacha zayin, kol hamumin ha-poislim b'kadashim, poislim b'parah. The red cow is considered a sacrifice for all matters with regards to blemishes. Any blemish that disqualifies a sacrifice disqualifies this cow. Shenemar, because it says, asher ein bamum, there cannot be a blemish. Hoysa yetze doifen, oy mechir, oy esnan, if it was a C-section born, or mechir means it was exchanged for a dog, esnan means it was given to a prostitute as payment, oy treifa, oy shenirba, or it had a mortal wound, or it was involved in bestiality, psula, disqualified, like another sacrifice. Shakala poislin es hakadashim lamizbeach, poislin es hapara. Anything which disqualifies sacrifices for the altar disqualifies the cow. Va'afal pi, she kache bed the kabayis, even though seemingly it shouldn't be that way, because every other sacrifice is what's called kache mizbeach, holy for the altar. This is holy for the temple funds. It's not really a sacrifice. Nevertheless, hoyelukra akasu chatas, since the Torah calls it a chatas in two places. Lamei nida chatas hi, me'afar sreifas hachatas. Torah calls the Parah Adumah a sin offering. So therefore it has some laws of the sacrifices in terms of blemishes and in terms of status, the way it was born and the way its body is functioning. It's permitted to buy an animal, the red cow, from an idol-worshipping Gentile. We're not going to worry that maybe the Gentile was involved in bestiality with the animal, because he won't purposely destroy his animal. The non-Jew knows the Jews want it. They'll pay a price for it. So why would he actively mess it up if he can't get the money? By the way, in the Talmud, one of the most famous stories of the Parah Adumah is with a guy, Dama ben Nesina. When the Talmud talks about honoring parents, it gives an example of a non-Jew who honored his father, that he had a red cow in his flock. No, he had stones for the cheshen. He had precious stones that were needed for the breastplate. So the sages came to buy it, and the key to the chest was under his father's pillow, and he wouldn't wake him up, even though they offered a higher and a higher price. And in the end, when his father woke up, he only took the original price. He said, I don't need your money, I want just the original thing. And so Hashem gave him a schus that a Parah Adumah was born to his flock, and the next Parah Adumah that was used in the temple came from him. So that's one of the sources that you can buy from a guy. You can buy a Parah Adumah from a non-Jew. Right. Now, this is all how the Parah Adumah is the same as all sacrifices. There's even certain ways, says the Rambam, Yesera Parah LaKadashim. There's a stringency in the red cow over other sacrifices, Shaha'avoida Paisalesba. Working with it makes it disqualified. If it was used in any sort of work, it cannot be used for the Parah Adumah. No, separate thing. Shenemar, because it says, here's the verse. The end of that verse. Asher le'olah aleha oil. No yoke went upon it. Besides for ein bamum. After not a blemish, it also says no yoke went on it. Ube'egla arufa imer. Where else do we find this concept? By an egla arufa. Egla arufa we're going to see in the end of the next book. Somebody dies, you find a murdered corpse, and you don't know who killed him. The closest city has to assume responsibility. And they bring a calf, and they chop off its head. It's a whole ceremony. So the egla arufa has to also be a very special calf. It says in the Torah, Asher le ubadba, Asher le mashcha ba'oil. No work was done with it, and it never pulled a yoke. So, ma oil ha'omur be'egla. Also shara vaydis ka'oil, the same way when it comes to the word oil by the egla arufa. Torah juxtaposes it to other types of work as well, not only yoke, but also no work. Also shara vaydis ka'oil, it makes other work like a yoke, af oil ha'amor bepara, yifsil b'shara vaydis ka'oil. So too, when Torah uses the word oil by Parah Adumah, it includes all other works. Any work disqualifies like a yoke. Ella, why does Torah single out the yoke? Because the yoke has one difference. The yoke will disqualify the cow, whether it actually did work or not, whether it's the time of work or not. Other work only disqualifies if it actually does the work. Meaning, as the Rambam says, Ketzad, what does this look like? You simply tied the yoke onto the cow. You just put it on, it's sitting in the backyard, you put the yoke on top. Even though you didn't do any plowing, psula, it's disqualified. Whereas if you brought it in to thresh, a different work, it only becomes disqualified once it actually threshes. If it doesn't actually thresh, that's not called doing work with it. And the same applies in all similar situations. If it's a yoke, even if it didn't do work, disqualified. If it's work, it has to actually do the work. What about some other things? A person rides on the cow. If he leaned on it. Nisla biznava ve'avar ba'es hanahar. If he hung on to its tail and rode through a river. That's how most commentators explain it. It's one thing. He hung onto the tail and went through the river that way. The cow pulled him through the river by holding onto its tail. Keep it or he folded a rope onto it. There's always a rope that you tie a cow to a fence to or whatever, so he put the rope on top of it. Nasan talisei aleha. He puts a cloth on it. Nasan aleha ksus shel sakin, or sackcloth. Psula, it's all disqualified. Because you've put something on it, it's like a yoke. Kashra b'moiseida, if you tied it with a rope. You didn't put the rope on it, you just tied it to a fence. If it was a rebellious animal and it required guarding, that's fine. But if not, it's disqualified. Because any guarding which is not needed is called a load. If you made a sandal, so it shouldn't slip, protecting it, or you put the talis, a cloth over it to save it from flies, it's kosher. This is the guiding rule. If you did it for its needs, to help it, it's still kosher. Any other need is disqualified. What happens if work was done automatically? You didn't do anything to it, it happened. Or a yoke came on it automatically. We'll soon see an example of this. How do you have a yoke automatically? If you're happy with it, psula, it's disqualified, even though you didn't do it. Shenemar, this we learn from the words by the Egla Arufa. Look what it says. It says, Asher loy ubad ba. No work was done with it. Now the word ubad, which means was done, could also be read, in Torah there's no vowels, could also be read avad. You actually did. Which means, Torah is saying, even if it was done automatically, it could be disqualifying, as long as it's like avad. As long as it's that you're happy with it as if you would have done it yourself. She'im ubad balir tzaynai, if it was done automatically, with your consent, hareza kimisha avadba. It's as if you did it yourself. Lefikach, therefore, here's an example. Im shachan aleha oif, if a bird came to rest on it. That's a yoke. Something is on the animal. But you don't care about that. It's not like you're not happy with that particularly. So ksheda, it's kosher. Allah le'al zachar, but if it was mated with a male animal, psula, that's disqualified. Ve'in tzarich le'mar shamu beres psula, and for sure if you see a pregnant cow, that's definitely disqualified because it definitely mated with an animal. Hichnisa l'rivka, what if you put it into the threshing area, but the rivka, the commentaries explain, is a place where the cows would graze and pasture. They'd be locked in, but they'd really be there for eating. And then v'dasha me'eleha, instead of eating, the cow goes and starts threshing, starts doing work. Kshera, that's kosher, because you didn't have in mind for it to work. Hichnisa kadesha tinak v'tadush, if you brought it in to nurse and to thresh, psula, then it's already disqualified. Sharei asal l'irtzaynai, because you did it, it does the work by your will, you want it. And the same applies to all similar situations. Halacha ches, Parah, shanelad b'psul. Okay, you have a red cow, something bad happened. What do? Now it's disqualified. But it's holy. Tipada. So you redeem it like any holy animals, and the money becomes holy. Same thing if it died. You should also redeem it because of the skin, so you should be able to use the skin. but not to feed its meat to dogs. The meat we never feed, we bury. But the hide could be used if you redeem it. Halacha test, nishchata l'shem chulin. What if the Kohen making a mistake? It's like a once in a century mitzvah. But he makes a mistake and he slaughters it, having in mind chulin, regular animals, not holy animals. Tipade ve'ena mechaperes. It should be redeemed, and it doesn't achieve atonement, meaning even if you use the ashes after you burn it, the ashes don't bring purity. Nishchata al gav ma'arachta. Once it was slaughtered on its platform, this we're going to see later chapters, a whole ceremony how this was done. On a special platform it was slaughtered. Once it's slaughtered there, aim la pidyon elamis, it can never be redeemed. If any problematic things happens going forward, there's no redemption for it. Halacha yud lakhu para umatzu acheres na mimena. This could be very rare, but let's say it happens. The sages or the court bought a red cow, and then they find a nicer one. Harezu tipada shalei b'mum. The first one should be redeemed, even though it doesn't have a mum. Now, this is not an obligation. They don't have to buy the nicer one. But if they wanted to buy the nicer one, there's permission to redeem the first one. Halacha Yud Aleph, if you look in the Torah, what does it say? Unisatem oisa el Elazar hakohen. You should give it to Elazar, the priest. Now, at the time, the father, Aaron HaKohen, was still alive. He was the high priest. Elazar is a regular kohen. So the Rambam says, Af kohen hedyet kosher l'sreifas hapara. Even a regular kohen is kosher for burning the red cow. Shenemar, because it says, Unisatem oisa el Elazar hakohen. Give it to Elazar the priest. Ba'adayin Aaron hayakayam. Aaron was still alive. Now, tradition teaches us this is not a particularity. This is not Torah being insisting on this. Zu nasis be'Elazar. This one had to be done with Elazar. Ushar kol aparis, but any other cow, bein b'koyin gadol, bein b'koyin hedyet, can be done whether by a high priest or by a regular priest. So, this verse is permission for a regular priest to do it, but not an obligation. Even the high priest can do it. Halacha Yud Beis, v'ha'oisa oisa, whoever is performing it, leivesh arba kelim shel kohen hedyet, wears the 4 clothings worn by a regular kohen. Bein sha'asa kohen hedyet, bein sha'asa kohen gadol. Whether the regular priest does it, or even if the high priest does it. This is a big novelty. Long discussion in the commentaries on this. High priest wearing the regular priest's clothing. And the Rebbe once said, it's a whole discussion, but not getting into it, but the bottom line is the Rebbe said that a kohen gadol has 2 parts to himself. He isn't a different entity. He's a kohen hedyet plus. He has a part of him which is regular priest, and also a high priest. Therefore, when he does the Parah Adumah service, he does it with the kohen hedyet part of himself, so he can wear the clothing of a kohen hedyet. Halacha Yud Gimel, fascinating concept. Kol ha'oiskin ba'parah mitchila v'ad soif. Usually you think temple services, you have to be the most pure, highest level holiness. But in the Torah it's clear that anybody who is dealing with the Parah Adumah, mitchila v'ad soif, from beginning to end, shehayu tvulei yom, if they were what's called a tvul yom means somebody who's in the middle of coming out of impurity. He already went to the mikveh, but he's waiting for sunset. In many cases, a tvul yom transmits impurity. But here for the Parah Adumah, it's clearly implicit that tvulei yom are kshedim l'maisei hapara u'lekadesh u'lehazis me'efra. They're all kosher for processing the cow. Lekadesh means preparing the water. U'lehazis means to sprinkle the water with the ash. V'afal pisha adayin le'heriv shimshon, even though the sun didn't set yet. Shazeh shenemar b'chol ha'parsha ish toher, even though the whole passage keeps on referring to the people as ish toher, pure people, hu hator l'maiser sheni. It means that they're pure for eating the second tithe. Afal pisha einei tor l'truma chiyariv shimshay, even though they won't be pure for eating truma till sunset. Hareza tor lepara, they're pure for the cow. Special derivation. And here we see a fascinating piece of Jewish history. And we do this a couple of times in halacha. There's a sect of Jews that were called the tzdukim. They didn't believe in the oral tradition. They interpreted everything literally. And they made big problems to the Jewish people in the Second Temple times. And many enactments were actually made specifically to combat them, just to spite them, just to show that we don't believe in what they say. And here was an example. Hatzdukin hayu emrim, says the Rambam, the Sadducees used to say, she'ein maisei hapara kasher ela b'me'ur ve'shemesh. They read these words literally. Pure means fully pure. It's only kosher to be involved in the cow if the sun set. If you went to the mikvah and you're a tvul yom, you're still waiting for the sunset, you can't be involved in the cow. But the sages believed, based on Hashem's tradition, that that's okay. So they would purposely use impure people. Lefikach, therefore, hayu beis din bebayis sheni mitamin es hakohen asoyref es hapara. The court, before the kohen went to do it, they'd make him impure. B'sheretz v'chayetzebeh, with a rodent, which makes you impure, dafka, for a day. V'toivel he would go to the mikveh and purposely v'achar kach oisek ba, and then go and get involved in the cow. Just to cancel the words of these willful sinners who rule on Jewish law based on whatever comes up in their mind, not with tradition. That's how important tradition is. We're going to do that specifically. Any utensil that was used for the ashes of the cow, purposely they made them impure, immersed them that day to show that Tvul Yom is fine. Now, by the way, we're going to see that because of this, we didn't want anyone to treat it too lightly. So they made many other stringencies to offset that. But in this particular area, they were lenient. Halacha Tesvav, not only that, this is a reed. A reed has a hollow inside. Many times they would use reeds to hold the ashes for the Parah Adumah. So if somebody carves out a reed, tube, to put the chatas ashes in it, that's the Parah Adumah ashes in it, yitame oisa, he should also make it impure, v'yat bilena, and put it in the mikveh, and then use it for the ashes. The person carving, the person who puts it in the mikveh needs to go to the mikveh himself. Because they treated the Parah Adumah and all that's along with it like a person who came in contact with a corpse on the seventh day. Go to the mikveh. You don't require sprinkling on the third and seventh days. We'll soon see that when a person becomes impure from a corpse, you have to be sprinkled from the ashes of Parah Adumah twice, on the third day and on the seventh day. This person doesn't need any sprinkling because he's already considered to be on the seventh day. Elamitama, the point was you made it impure just to show the Sadducees, just to spite them. And then he would immerse the reed and then put the ashes in it. Point is, at every single stage, we want to show the authenticity of the oral Torah, and therefore we do things just to fit with the oral Torah and against the Sadducees.